Let's talk about lance rebalancing in Fire Emblem Engage. So to begin, we have the joke weapon, which I think is fine. It has some stats, 9 mites, which is actually surprisingly high. I think it's actually better than iron. But 85 hits, 8 weights, you eat it. It's a meme weapon from the well. You're not intended to really use it. It's meant as like a funny thing you can do as a joke. You can't forge it, so I wouldn't change it. It's time for the hero weapon, FENSALIR. So this thing is arguably one of the best lances in the game. 12 base might, 80 hits, 8 base weight. It's from the Heroes DLC, which was made a free download. You used to have to like install Heroes on your phone, link it to your Nintendo account, and then you would get this. So it was always free. You just needed a phone and to install Heroes. But now you can just get it whenever. It also has a passive, inflicts attack +2. It's attack -2. This is incorrect. Inflicts attack -2 for 1 turn on adjacent foes. And then for the forge cost, this final tier I believe is incorrect. I know that the forge costs on this weapon are reasonable. They're pretty good. Like you can easily +5 this before middle game. So I'm going to say this is perfect. It's not overpowered because it doesn't break the game. You still need to have high speed to double. You need high strength to kill. So it's basically just like a better steel lance, more or less, that looks cool and is awesome. So that's pretty much all I have to say about that. Next, we have the free well weapon, the REPTAR lance. Now, this thing has slightly better base stats than FENSALIR, but its forges are more expensive by a huge margin, to the point where FENSALIR will generally outdamage it. But if you do forge this to +3 to +5, it's really good, but the forges are quite expensive. I can't really find the forge information online, but just trust that it is very expensive in terms of silver to +4 and +5 it. If you do, though, it is a really good lance. Is it the best lance? Not really. There's definitely better options. I would adjust its +4 and +5 costs. Next, we have the slim lance. Now, slim weapons I consider to be quite bad, so I do think they need pretty huge buffs. Basically, this is useful for early game Chloe, where it lets her double because her build is low early game, and she has a hard time doubling with like a silver or a steel, or in some cases FENSALIR. But generally, these are pretty weak weapons that even when you forge them, they don't really get that much better. So +4 more might. The forge costs are cheap. You get a little bit of crit, but it ultimately doesn't really matter. And you wouldn't forge it into iron because you're handed iron lances for free anyways. So in order for this to be relevant in any capacity, you would need huge buffs. Now, obviously, we don't want to just buff its like base damage. We would want to give it something else. Maybe its forging progression's better. Maybe it has like some crit rate. Maybe it gets to like 20 crits by +5, like incrementing up. Maybe it gives you even more hits, so then it's like a hit fix with a little bit of crit or something, so it has some kind of upside. But in its current form, it's just basically unusable. Next, we have the Iron Lance. So the Iron Lance has decent bases and is good in early game, but it does need something more for it to be relevant in endgame. So I would say it needs like huge buffs to be relevant. If we look at its forging, its forge costs are actually quite good overall. It's pretty cheap to +5. You do get +6 might. It also hit fixes. So you could argue that it gives you might and hit fixes, but it doesn't hit fix to the point where it's like massive value. And units that want to double with lances usually want like a steel minimum or a killer, maybe a silver, maybe a javelin, definitely FENSALIR, which I consider to be the best lance for just like non-crit builds and one range. But it can also be forged into quite a few things, which is nice. Steel Lance, RIDERSBANE, Killer Lance. So if you want to make an early steel... Now, the game hands you a Steel Lance early as part of a free update, which is weird. So it's kind of a strange thing. RIDERSBANE's obviously big utility for smacking horses and wolves. Then Killer Lance is obviously, much better for killing things because critting is good. So generally, iron and slim weapons are just kind of, lackluster. They don't really do anything. They're just early game things that usually you don't even use, or if you do, it's for like a chapter or two. So they would need to see some kind of huge buffs in some other way that isn't just might to make them relevant. Next, we have the Steel Lance. So the Steel Lance I consider to be very good. I don't really think it needs too much, if anything. I think it's actually in a really good spot. So without FENSALIR, you basically run Steel Lance, and Steel Lance has reasonable forge costs and good bases, and also has a little bit of crit rate, which is nice, because sometimes you'll just randomly crit, and you also can get +5 more crit, so you can get +10 base crit, which is pretty interesting for the weapon. And for the forging costs, 5 silver, 50 steel, 500 iron. That's not terrible. Steel weapons are like reasonably expensive to forge. It gets +6 might, +10 hit, -2 weight. So it basically becomes weightless for most units, especially units that have low build that want to double. Gives you a little bit of crit, which is nice. Gives you hit fix, gives you might. I think steel is like the best weapon category overall outside of crit builds for just like general damage if you're doubling. There's other weapons for like single hit, but that's like not doubling based. It can be forged into silver and flame lance, which is kind of cool. But beyond that, you really wouldn't do that anyways. So, all right. Silver lance, huh? This thing is rough because very few units have high enough build to wield this without it slowing them down. The units that join with it, Goldmary joins with it, Tamara joins with it, and they both don't want it. Goldmary does not have enough build, Tamara does not have enough build for this weapon. This weapon, the 14 might is decent, but the big issue with silver weapons is the forge cost. So +1 is reasonable, +2 is kind of this in between. It just gives you hit fix, and then +3 is really what you want for the -1 weight, +4 might, and it gets really expensive to +5 it. 20 silver total, 100 steel total, 800 iron total, 10k for just 2 more might and -1 more weight and +5 more hit. It's really not worth it to forge above +3 in most situations because it burns your silver out. So it definitely needs a forge cost adjustment on the +4 and +5 in order for it to be relevant. If they were much cheaper, then it would be much better. I feel like most people don't use this weapon for this reason. Generally, great weapons are better for slow units if you just want big might, and other weapons are better for doubling because the weight of this thing on most characters does slow them down too much. The Brave Lance. So the Brave Lance has 5 base might, 70 hit, or 75 hit, and 14 weight. Most units cannot double very easily with this thing, or they're slowed down by it. So assuming the target you're attacking is like medium speed or slower, most units that are fast can kind of double with this. The weight is always kind of an issue for it. There are ways to mitigate the weight, mostly through engravings. But generally, it's an okay weapon for like Picket for going for Sandstorm procs, and for Halberdier if you want to run Halberdier. Halberdier on Brave Lance, I'm not really super sure about, honestly, but you could do it. And then for the actual forges, this is really where it suffers. I think overall the weapon's kind of fine, but we need to adjust the cost of forging here, so they're an adjust cost of forging. The Killer Lance. The Killer Lance has pretty good base stats, considering that it's a crit weapon. 30 crits, 9 weight, 7 might, 75 hit. These are pretty good bases, considering crits are 3 times, so that's pretty decent. And then the forging costs are very cheap. Now, is the Killer Lance overpowered? Maybe? Maybe a little bit. But I don't know, it doesn't need reworked. It doesn't need nerfed. Maybe slight rework, or slight, or nerf. Doesn't need nerfed. I think its costs need increased a little bit. I feel like all killer weapons are way too cheap to forge relative to other options, especially because it scales your crit too. Like, even if you're just 70 crit rate, most of your combats, especially if you double, will result in a crit, which will probably result in a kill, which is like pretty brainless. So I don't know. I think it's like kind of too, maybe slight nerf on it. I would just increase its costs to upgrade stuff. Next, we have RIDERSBANE. So RIDERSBANE, I do think, is in a good spot. I think it's perfect. Its hit rate is lower than other lances. Its weight is high, so it's hard to double with, which is good because if you use it to attack super fast enemies, you're basically never going to double them, like Wolf Knights. Against slower enemies like Great Knights and Paladins, though, you can probably double them with it. It's effective versus horses, mounts, whatever, you know, like wolves, horses. The forging on it is cheap. It uses the same forging formula as the killer weapons, but this is a pure utility weapon, so having them be cheaper to forge I think is perfectly reasonable, because if you use this against non-mounted enemies or flyers, it's basically just a bad lance. So it's literally like a specialized tool that if you dump resources into, you kind of are missing out on like more general killing tools. So I do think it's kind of perfectly balanced in its current form. The Javelin. The Javelin has pretty good stats overall, considering it's a 1 to 2 range. The nice thing about the Javelin is it can proc triggers like Sandstorm, so if you enemy phase, even if you're dealing like no damage, if enough things attack you at 2 range that you wouldn't be able to 1 range on enemy phase, you can just chuck a Javelin at them and maybe trigger some kills. It's also decent for early game, for 1 rounding, and for poke damage, and for chip damage. For other characters that aren't Tamara, it's probably not going to be like killing consistently or killing at all. And for forging it, the forges are pretty reasonable. They're not too expensive. You can easily forge it a little bit. Now you can 1 round with lance power on certain units with this if you double, but mostly you're going to be going for like low percent crits, like if you crit engrave it or sandstorms to kill an enemy phase with it. Player phase use, it's mostly going to be used for, you know, procs or just like lance power and stuff like this. It can be forged into a spear. Overall, I think it's in a good spot. I wouldn't really change anything about it. It's not like, it's not underpowered or overpowered. It's just decent. There's some use cases, but none of them are oppressive and clearly insane. Next, we have the spear. The spear, I think, is in a rough spot because it weighs so much. I feel like the characters that want to use this are just like punished for low build. So if you make like Kagetsu a thing, like a spear class or a lance class, he can kind of use this because he has like a little bit more base build, but even he will be slowed down by it. So 15 weight, like Gold Mary joins with it. Her build is abysmal. Tamara, I think, has one. Maybe she's a Javelin, I can't remember, but Tamara might want to use one and her build is not high enough, and Chloe might want to use one and her build is not high enough. Those are really the units. Maybe Louis, but the issue is if you're playing Louis, he's too slow, so he's not doubling, so the weight just doesn't matter. I think spears have like punishingly high weight for no reason, and all of the female lance users who want to use it are basically just not allowed to unless they're attacking a slower target, and it's like Chloe on like a Griffin Knight or something, or like a seriously speed fixed unit. And even then, its big issue is its forge cost as well. So I would actually hugely buff the spear. In its current form, it's just not worth it. It costs way too much to forge it. Its forging stat like changes are not really that relevant. If they reduce the weight, that would help it. If they've reduced the weight of the weapon at base, and then these reduced it even further, it's just way too heavy. And for the damage difference versus Javelin, like it is double the damage, but then you're not doubling. So, but also you have to factor in like strength, defense of the enemies, and like engravings and emblems and so on for stat changes. But it's just it's too punishing. A lot of the lance users are like 8 to 10 build on their best classes, so it just seriously slows them down. It's kind of a pain to run, and I just don't recommend it. It needs huge buffs, needs crafting cost reduced, and it needs weight reduced to like 11. I think it'd be perfect. All right, next we have the Flame Lance. The Flame Lance is weird because it has lower might than the Levin Sword, and it should have higher weight than the Levin Sword, but it has much higher weight than it. I think Levin is like 10 or 11 base weight, and this thing is 16. And similar to the Spear, all of the units that want to use this just can't because it weighs too damn much. Like very few units in the game, period, can wield this without it seriously screwing up their speed. The only unit who gets close to being able to wield this without it reducing speed is Pandreo, because he has unnaturally high build. For some reason, I don't know why he does, but they just gave him like really high build. I think a little bit of build growth as well. So he's like the only unit who could really reasonably run this, and still he's slowed down a little bit by it. But this thing needs its base weight reduced to like 13, its base might increased to at least like 15, so it's better than 11 sword, because lances are supposed to be stronger than swords. So why is 11 sword out damaging a flame lance? Like if the way the game is balanced is lances always have higher might than swords, higher weight, higher might, less hit. That's the balancing. And then axes are even higher might, higher weight, less hit. So it's like a scale. So like swords are the most accurate, lowest damage, lowest weight, and then lances are middle ground, and then axes are low accuracy, high weight, high damage. That's how the game is designed. So like it has less damage than a sword. It has the increased weight, but it has way less damage. So it doesn't, like, at least give it more damage if it's going to be this heavy. But this thing's like as heavy as a tomahawk, which is crazy. For the foraging costs, though, they're not bad. I would say they're fine, but it needs big buffs to its base stats. I guess we'll just put base stat buffs. It definitely needs like less weight, and it needs more damage. BRIONAC is pretty decent in terms of stats. You get it from chapter 22. 17 weight hurts it. A lot of the units that would benefit from doubling with this tend to not be able to double with it that well because the weight is just so high. Even the best build units in the game have a hard time doubling with this. There is a build that makes good use of BRIONAC, and it is Chloe General with Lin Ring. Chloe General has a maximum speed cap of 20. So that gets her to 20 base speed. You run speed plus 5, 25 base speed, Lin Ring, 30 base speed. You do speed plus 2 meal, 32 base speed, and then you get speed taker on her, which gets her to 42 speed. And the build on general Chloe is high enough that this basically should be weightless for her. So she'll be like 35 to like 40 speed, doubling with this for huge might. That actually is unironically a really strong build because it takes a Lin unit and turns them into a mitigation tank, which is insane. And also you're fast enough to double, you're tanky, you have a little bit of res. Like the big issue with most tanks is that they get doubled by mages. So Chloe's higher res and the fact that she doesn't get doubled allows her to farm with this thing. But outside of that particular build, BRIONAC is a very awkward weapon to use, and I would argue it needs some base stat buffs. Because you get it so late, I feel like it should be like 13 weight, and then it would be fine. 17 might is a lot, 13 base weight is fine. The other issue, actually let's put in their big buffs. The other issue with this is that its forging cost is insane because it's an S rank. All S rank weapons have crazy forge costs. I think these need reduced. If you want to view this as like an end game thing that's like a sign of status or whatever, or grinding to get it to plus 5, then fine. But if you want to actually run this in a playthrough and forge it reasonably, 50 silver is more. I'm pretty sure it's like you'd have to convert. I don't think you'll get 50 silver from min-maxing silver acquisition from like end of levels and stuff through donations. I think you would legitimately need to buy it and convert it to get to 50 silver. I don't even think there's 50 base silver in the game without converting resources, so that's like an absurd amount. So consider that, but it needs buffs. Next we have the Iron Greatlance. So the Iron Greatlance is basically just like a starter Greatlance that has some decent might for early game, and if you were to actually use it, you'd have to seriously buff it. Its forging costs, they're largely reasonable. You could easily get it to plus 5. I don't know why it says plus 6 here. This is obviously some of these websites have bad information, but I think this is meant to be Steel Greatlance, probably because it's getting crit. So this is a typo. So that's supposed to be Steel Greatlance. But yeah, it just needs huge buffs to be relevant. Nothing too notable there. Steel Greatlance. All right, Steel Greatlance is serviceable. It's good for like middle game for smacking things. It's like a stepping stone. You arguably could run it long term to some degree. It has a little bit of crit, which is nice. So maybe you could go for like 30-40% crits with the crit engraving. The forge is on it. Steel Forge is decent. It gets 5 more crit, putting it at 10 base. It loses some weight. The big thing about losing weight on great weapons is just so that you don't get doubled. So if you want, 28 base mites and 10 base crits, that's serviceable. But if you were to run this, you would need to buff it. So it would need some base buffs. But like even then, it's just stepping stone. So I'm just putting perfect. You're not going to be running this. It's not like a doubling weapon. It doesn't have the benefits that steel. Like it reducing the weight doesn't matter really. And it's not like a good steel weapon, I would say. Silver Greatlance. Silver Greatlance, I think, is almost perfect, but I would still adjust its upgrade costs. The weight is 15, it's whatever. 28 might is really good. This allows weak units to deal meaningful damage, and in some cases, one-shot or almost one-shot. Strong units obviously can one-shot a little bit better with it, but it's good on tanks for the most part. Chloe General can make use of this. She won't get doubled if she's on Lin, and she can just smack things for huge mites, but usually she wants to go for doubling. This is good for when she can't double yet. And then the forge costs are obviously too high, as is the case with most silver weapons. And then finally we have Venomous. So Venomous is really good in terms of just like stats, but it's really difficult to get this because you have to get Fearney to level 5, which costs an insane amount of money. and it doesn't really give you that many benefits. Like Fear Nay level 5 isn't really optimal for like ore gain. Generally, you want to get Fear Nay to like 2, I think, like 2 or 3 early, and then you want to get Brodia to 4, so that when you're in Brodia, you get like a shit ton of like ore. So 34 might is huge though. 80 hit is really good also. 10 crit is nice. The other obvious issue with this is it's like an S rank weapon. All S rank weapons they decided are absurd to upgrade. So reasonably you could get it's like +2, +3. Getting it to +5 is like, you know, the most extreme level of favoritism imaginable. +4ing it could be done, but isn't recommended. So +1ing it, I would say, is pretty attainable. +1 to +2. So it does have more might than the other weapons, but you have to consider you have to dump so much money into Fear Nay to get this. So I do think it needs the forge costs reduced. I'm fine with it being a tier 5 donation because it's like that's just part of the game. Like it's you're paying a ton of gold in exchange for a better silver Greatlance with crit rate and I think better hit rate as well. So I think that's fine, but I would reduce the cost. The other thing that sucks too is you have to donate so much money and then you have to pay a ton of silver and cash to upgrade it. So it kind of is like, you know, pouring salt in the wound. It's like, oh, you just blew 200k or however much it costs. Spend another, you know, 25k plus 50 silver, which you do not have and will never have unless you like convert resources. So here's where I think the lances are right now. Overall, it's not bad, honestly. The ones that need adjusted are still good at +3. Like, they're not bad. And then the ones that need huge buffs. So, like, BRIONAC, you could argue BRIONAC is fine. That's it, like, reasonable. Spear, I think, is trash. Slim weapons are bad. Iron weapons are bad. So, like, that's kind of hard to ignore. BRIONAC, you could argue, just needs, like, slight buffs. Maybe we could even put it into buff base stats and just leave the forge expensive or whatever. But, well, I guess it's, like, I want it to have both. Because it's an S-rank weapon, you get an endgame. I think that's fair. And then Killer Lance, you could argue needs a rework or a nerf, or you could say it's fine. I'm fine with either of those. But definitely drop a comment as to what you think about this, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.